Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we try to cut through the daily noise. We deliver a rigorous, fact-based analysis of the most critical global events, all synthesized from hundreds of sources. Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into two, well, frankly, rapidly evolving theaters of tension: the escalating crisis in the Middle East, and also the significant strategic realignments we're seeing across South Asia.
And our mission here is really to distill this complex geopolitical material for you. We want to identify the key decision makers, analyze their proposed courses of action, and set the crucial international context. The aim is to keep you informed, keep you aware of the facts, without generating sensationalism or, undue fear.
Absolutely. And before we unpack all this dense material, just a note that this deep dive is brought to you by our sponsor, ProWave AI. This entire conversation, which is structured from synthesized intelligence across more than 250 global feeds, is generated by Stylo News. That's the advanced AI-powered news application. Okay, let's begin in the Middle East. Diplomatic tensions really collided with renewed economic pressures this past week. The UN General Assembly, specifically on September 27th, was the stage for a sharp condemnation from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Yes, and what's immediately crucial here is the sheer scope of Lavrov's criticism. It wasn't just focused. He condemned Israel not just for the conflict in Gaza, citing, the illegal use of force against Palestinians,
Right.
but also for aggressive actions across a remarkably broad range of territories. We're talking Qatar, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. So this wasn't just a localized criticism. It felt like an attempt to delegitimize Israel's entire regional security strategy.
And this very public condemnation, it arrived just as the UN Security Council moved to reimpose those crippling sanctions on Iran.
That's right. It's key timing. Because Iran wasn't complying with parts of the 2015 nuclear deal, the Security Council used the what's known as the snapback mechanism. For anyone unfamiliar, this essentially means all the older, tougher UN sanctions that were lifted under the original deal. They just snap back automatically.
A serious economic hammer, then.
Exactly.
And Lavrov then seemed to tie these two issues together, didn't he? Using the humanitarian crisis to criticize the sanctions.
Precisely. He accused Western powers of, undermining diplomacy regarding Iran. His argument, as reported in sources like Kommersant, for instance, is basically if you criticize Israel's military actions, which destabilize Iran, and then you immediately impose severe sanctions, you're sabotaging any chance of peaceful resolution. You're almost pushing towards confrontation. It links that financial policy directly to what's happening on the ground, the humanitarian situation.
Let's shift to that impact on the ground. The sources, they paint a really devastating picture of the local situation in Gaza.
It's a collapse. A genuine collapse.
Yeah.
We're seeing very specific details that illustrate the humanitarian catastrophe. Hospitals like Al-Quaid's mentioned as being under siege, essential medical facilities destroyed, and the shortages. Shortages of absolutely essential supplies, oxygen, food, even basic water. It's led to a near-total systemic failure. The civilian suffering, the widespread starvation. That's what's overwhelmingly driving the social media sentiment we'll touch on later.
Okay, zooming out a bit to the national level. Israel is clearly expanding its military operations beyond Gaza now, targeting Iranian-backed groups, and meanwhile, Iran is dealing with immense internal stress.
Yes, those reimposed sanctions have caused severe economic strain in Tehran. We're seeing reports of inflation spikes, rising public anxiety. It's palpable. But the calculation in Tel Aviv is equally important for what happens next. We've seen the appointment of David Zini as the new hardline Israeli security chief.
Right, Zine.
And the fact that he publicly opposes any truce in Gaza, well, that signals a deep institutional commitment within Israel. It points towards a policy of continued decisive military solutions, almost regardless of external diplomatic pressure.
Okay, let's pivot now. While the Middle East obviously dominates the headlines, the chaos there is already redrawing geopolitical lines elsewhere. Let's look at how that Iran-Israel conflict seems to have catalyzed a major strategic realignment in South Asia. I'm talking about September 17th, the signing of the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan.
This is a huge development, really significant. It formalizes decades of military collaboration that was perhaps less formal before. And crucially, it includes a mutual defense commitment. That's the key phrase. Analysts are already comparing it directly to NATO's Collective Defense Clause.
That comparison to NATO's Article 5, that's immense, isn't it? For our listener, what does that comparison instantly mean for, say, rival nations like India?
Well, it fundamentally means that if either Saudi Arabia or Pakistan is attacked, The other is obligated to view it as an attack on itself
Mm.
and respond accordingly. It
Mm.
just changes the whole balance of power calculation in the region.
Right.
The geopolitical motivation seems clear. Saudi Arabia wants to guarantee its security amid all this rising instability from the Iran-Israel tensions. And Pakistan? Well, Pakistan likely sees this as a massive strategic gain. They secure a key regional partner and potentially attract critical investment from Riyadh, too.
But here's where the agreement gets, well, complicated. Even controversial, perhaps. Sources are highlighting a serious concern. It's being raised by Saudi analysts, retired military officials,
Yeah.
about ambiguous language in the pact. We are talking about the nuclear ambiguity aspect.
The ambiguity seems to suggest Pakistan's potential provision of nuclear capabilities, or maybe a security umbrella as part of this deal. Now, Pakistani officials, they're maintaining what they call strategic ambiguity on it. They're not confirming, but they're not denying these arrangements either.
So, is this ambiguity intentional deterrence? A way to warn off rivals? Or is it more of maybe a political loophole, something designed to satisfy domestic audiences, perhaps, while, challenging global non-proliferation norms?
That's the absolute crux of the friction point, isn't it? For nations like India, and certainly the U.S., it immediately raises huge alarms about nonproliferation. Think about it. If Saudi Arabia, a key regional power, potentially gains access to nuclear deterrence, even indirectly, it could set off a really catastrophic regional arms race. So the language is likely dual purpose. It's maximum deterrence against perceived Iranian aggression for the Saudis. And for Pakistan, it's a massive geopolitical bargaining chip.
And this heightened strategic environment, it seems to have fed directly into the escalating rhetoric we saw between India and Pakistan. That happened at the UN General Assembly just between September 27th and 29th.
Oh, the exchanges were fiery. Very much so. Pakistan vehemently rejected India's repeated labeling of it as Terroristan. Pakistani diplomats called the rhetoric utterly shameful. And this wasn't, in isolation. It followed that military escalation back in May 2025. Remember, India claimed airstrikes in Pakistan after a terrorist attack in Kashmir.
Right, I remember. And there were conflicting claims back then, too.
Exactly. Pakistan denied involvement in the attack, and they counterclaimed they downed Indian jets, which India then denied. So these UNGA exchanges just underscore how deeply entrenched these animosities are. And that makes this new Saudi-Pakistan pact an immediate and potentially volatile factor in the subcontinent.
Okay, understanding the events is one thing, but we really need to identify the key players, the decision makers, and analyze the fundamental differences in the paths forward they're proposing.
Let's start back in the Middle East. The U.S., under President Trump, seems to be actively pursuing a course of action focused on, let's call it, accelerated diplomacy. They've unveiled this 21-point proposal. It seems targeted at a quick resolution, getting hostages returned.
That proposal received cautious optimism, is that right? Why only cautious? What are the sticking points preventing, genuine optimism?
Well, the caution really stems from the radical gulf between the proposal's immediate goals, hostages, quick fix, and Israel's perceived long-term objectives. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's course of action seems pretty clear. Continued military deterrence. He firmly opposes recognizing a Palestinian state, and his priority seems to be the military defeat of Hamas.
So anything short of that.
Exactly. Any proposal that doesn't fully align with those goals, which seem to be a non-negotiable end to Hamas and no premature statehood, will likely only ever be met with caution, maybe even skepticism, from Tel Aviv.
Meanwhile, Iran, represented by officials like Ali Larijani, they've staked out their own position.
Yes, a course of action you could describe as prepared military response or deterrence. They're warning of strong, immediate retaliation against any perceived Israeli military action that crosses their established red lines, whatever those might be.
Okay, shifting back to South Asia then, Saudi Arabia's primary course.
Regional balancing and security, I'd say. They need this defense pact operationalized to secure their borders, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they also have to carefully manage this new alignment. They can't afford to alienate key allies like the U.S. or important economic partners like India. It's a balancing act.
And Pakistan. They view the pact as strategic deterrence against external threats, clearly. But internally, they're also deeply focused on domestic management, aren't they? Trying to manage crippling economic issues while juggling these new security pressures.
That's right. And finally, India. They're cautious about the new pact, understandably. They seem to be maintaining a consistent course of action centered on counterterrorism, using diplomatic forums like the UNGA to continuously reject Pakistan's claims, portraying them as a state sponsor of terrorism. And that, in turn, justifies their own strong security posture in the region.
Now, it's essential to understand that the narrative, how we perceive these events, is shaped by the perspectives of those reporting it. Let's look briefly at how some of our sources presented these facts.
Yeah, you see clear patterns emerge. For instance, Russian media outlets like Kommersant, and also African sources like France's La Nouvelle Tribune, they focus quite heavily on Lavrov's criticism of Israeli aggression. They framed it as a destabilizing force, often implying it's driven by Western support.
Okay.
Conversely, if you look at an Indian source like Telangana Today, they offered a very neutral factual analysis of the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact. But importantly, they emphasize India's inherent caution. That reflects a kind of strategic bias towards perhaps non-intervention in internal diplomatic narratives while highlighting their own concerns.
This takes us naturally to public sentiment. We analyze social media data, specifically on X, across key conflict hashtags. Hashtag Middle East, hashtag Israel, hashtag Hamas, hashtag Iran, hashtag attack. What really stands out to you in that digital town square?
The overwhelming dominance of negativity,
Yeah.
just sheer negativity. Across almost all those conflict-related tags, the sentiment ranges from 60% up to, in some cases, 95% negative. And this negative volume, it seems directly driven by the graphic reports of the human cost, the suffering, and also just a generalized fear of regional escalation. I think people are just exhausted by the violence.
We did find deep polarization specifically around the hashtag Israel tag, didn't we? We saw about 45% of posts expressing positive support, for Israel's right to defense, often from Western audiences. Yet a slightly larger portion, maybe 50% to 60%, were negative, specifically criticizing the intensity and scale of military actions. That often came from pro-Palestinian voices and users in the Middle East.
That's right. But condemnation of hashtag Hamas, however, that was overwhelmingly negative, pretty consistent, around 80% and 90%.
Yeah.
You see users condemning the group as a terrorist organization across various geographies. There's much less ambiguity there in the public sphere.
So if we look across all this deep division, is there any unifying theme? Can we find any common ground in the sentiment?
Well, the data seems to suggest that the broad common viewpoint is just sheer fatigue and frustration. That's the overriding emotion. Users, almost regardless of their political alignment on the core conflict itself, are expressing deep concern over the human cost. And they're quite vocal in criticizing external powers, whoever they perceive them to be, for driving the escalation. This public weariness, well, it may not change government policy overnight, but it certainly influences the diplomatic latitude available to decision-makers like Netanyahu or Trump. It creates pressure. So, as we conclude this deep dive, we want to provide you, the listener, with some specific, verifiable points to track. Things to watch for in the near future that might signal the direction these conflicts are heading.
Okay, first, related to Gaza and any prospects for peace, keep an eye on the ongoing reception and, crucially, the implementation of that U.S. 21-point peace proposal. Watch that over the coming months. Its viability really depends on reconciling the immediate hostage crisis with the deeper, often conflicting strategic goals of all the parties involved.
Second, keep a very close watch on Iran compliance, the International Atomic Energy Agency's monitoring, and any ongoing negotiations regarding Iran's nuclear program. These are absolutely critical, especially now sanctions have been intensified via snapback. Any deviation, any perceived noncompliance could potentially trigger a further regional crisis.
Third, turning back to South Asia, the operationalization of that strategic mutual defense agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Watch how that unfolds throughout 2025 and into 2026. That demands intense scrutiny. We need to watch for any clarification or perhaps a continued lack of clarification regarding that rumored nuclear sharing component, because that clarity or lack thereof will determine if this remains just a strategic agreement or if it becomes a serious non-proliferation nightmare.
And finally, following those heated UNGA exchanges we talked about, track any potential diplomatic engagements. Look for third-party mediation efforts, anything that might try to de-escalate the rhetoric and tensions between India and Pakistan. Will dialogue resume, or will tensions continue to simmer?
So after all that, what does this all mean for you, the informed global citizen trying to follow these complex events?
Well, I think the overarching takeaway is that the current environment is defined by intensely interconnected regional instability. It's not isolated pockets anymore. Military actions in one theater, like the Middle East, now seem to trigger almost immediate diplomatic and strategic consequences in others, like South Asia.
It's all linked.
These crises are deeply linked, yes,
Yeah.
and that demands careful, objective monitoring by the international community and by informed individuals like you.
This has been your deep dive. And we want to be clear, Stylo News used its advanced AI to synthesize intelligence from a really wide array of traditional news sources. We're talking Reuters, the BBC, Commersant, Dawn.com, many others, alongside proprietary analysis of ex-user posts to create this very news brief for you.
And if you want to gain this kind of customized AI-powered news on demand, delivered without bias or sensationalism, we really encourage you to subscribe to Stylo News. You can start your 7-day free trial today. Just go to www.stylonews.com.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We really appreciate you trusting us with your intelligence gathering today. We certainly hope you found this information valuable, maybe even illuminating. Please watch more Stylo News reports and do follow us on your favorite social media platforms.